please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Patty. Before we move on to Citizens Be Heard, I just need to make a couple announcements. One is Lisa Church has been deputized as our deputy recorder as Summer's on vacation. So thank you, Lisa. I forgot to give you, are we on? I forgot, okay. And then also our August 9th meeting will be canceled because several council members are going to be out. So we'll let you know if we're going to reschedule that. We'll give you plenty of notice if we reschedule that meeting. So we'll start off with Citizens Be Heard. Joe?
Yep. Thanks for listening. I'm just going to start off with a letter I wrote to Luke with correspondence. This is for Luke and Jason, because I didn't quite get him. It says, thank you for responding. You're the only city council member that has ever responded to my comments I have. I do appreciate you and thank you for reaching out to the Planning Commission and myself, but I do have a concern for the other property owners that are not aware of these ordinance and changes that affect their property rights. This is why I'm asking for another public hearing to get the facts out on all who is going to be affected. This is not a privilege, it is a right. And you as the council have the power to call another public hearing to show the new changes in the proposed ordinance. I think it's the right thing to do. I want to thank you personally for asking for incentives, or nothing would have changed. You were the only member who said you were for incentives for the developers at the first meeting I came to. I read the minutes from the public hearing in the planning on March 24th, and not one single comment from an R3 or an R4 property owner was at that meeting. This doesn't add up. It's an important ordinance. I think by having a second public hearing will help stop future litigations and lawsuits, which cost everyone, and no one really wins. And thank you for listening. Joe Downer.
Thanks, Joe. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. Randy Day is my name, citizen of Moab, Utah, for a long time. I come before you tonight with a lot of concerns about what we're doing with our zoning and how we're approaching the R4 and how we're approaching the R3 with the densities that's been given. If I read through it, the proposed ordinances, I understand it without changes that I have not seen. There's setbacks and there's parking regulations, which I think the lax of the parking regulations isn't a bad idea based on where we're trying to be. But I pulled out the zoning map and looked at how much R4 that's vacant. There's very little that's vacant. There's very little R3 that's vacant. Ergo, regardless of what your ordinance says, if they decide not to develop there, it just will be vacant land, or it'll be in single families. We don't have enough land in the city to address this problem. You don't have it. It's not there. You can get really creative and go to 4.5, 5 stories. You can do those kind of things, and that's going to create some density, but it's not going to create the land. You need to be looking at annexation. You need to be looking at how we cherry stemmed, and I was in that, and I paid for a lot of that to get the university in. I know that deal. We need to get out there and take a good part of the valley and make it the city. You don't have any land. Just look at the maps. It's not there. I don't know how the studies come out and said you got enough land that you don't. I've looked at it. Just pull up a map and take a common sense look at it someday and say, where could we build all the apartments that's not already built on, that doesn't already have a trailer park on it? They're not there. You don't have it. I think we should be looking at annexation if you want Moab City to take care of this problem. Otherwise, go push the county to do it, because you don't have it. And be very careful when you say, this is who's going to live here. That is a dangerous road to go down. I would never put it in a deed restriction under any circumstances. To make it an ordinance in the city, I will have to abide by that under the rules of the city, but I would not allow it to be on a deed in a property. Because as soon as I have a deed restriction, lenders look at it and we know what lenders can do with that. In today's world where the interest rates have jumped 4 points in the last 2 years, we're from 2% to 6%. It's going to go higher. So it's not going to be happening anyway. Because based on the median income of our county, taking 1/3 of my project and making that whatever that number ends up being, right now I'm saying 1/3 because that's all I've read. If that ends up being there, it makes the project almost unviable. Based on cost, based on land cost, based on infrastructure cost, based on the cost of doing business in a city and county, paying your impact fees, paying everything that you pay, and then looking at taxes. My taxes in the city went up from 1,800 to 4,100 on one duplex. That's where my taxes stand. Ergo, those rates have got to go up in order for me to still be able to make a profit on my land. These are the things we're faced with. It's not how we're going to create affordable housing. You don't have any land to create it. You don't have it. It's like running the dairy farm without the cows. It doesn't matter how mad you want to be a dairy farmer. It's not going to happen if you don't have the right cows. We need to get the right ordinances. I would love to help you and support you in annexation, to get that land out there, to go get it. And then let's make it happen. Then we can create pre-annexation agreements with landowners that get what you want and get them what they want. And I thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy. Stay tuned. All right, anybody else that didn't fill out paperwork that would like to speak tonight? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to department head update with Annie to talk about Parks, Recreation, and Trail Master Plan update. She's going to talk to us a little bit about the scope of work and the outcomes that we can anticipate. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. All right, good evening. So the need for a Parks Master Plan has been talked about for quite a long time, and we are finally ready to start that process. So tonight I wanted to give a big picture overview of what to expect in the next year. So the key elements of the scope of work and the outcomes of the plan is, first of all, we want to incorporate some very well organized techniques for a proactive public participation plan. And that final plan will be developed once we have a contractor on board. But we're hoping to find some ways outside of the typical avenues that we normally do public participation. We'd like an inventory of our existing parks and also provide a conditions reports for each park and their facilities. Along with that, for each park, a very park-specific list of opportunities and constraints, and then appropriate future improvements that may happen. We want to identify any current and future unmet needs in our park system. We also want to prioritize park improvements, developments, and any potential for future expansion. So the final master plan will have an action plan that has strategies, priorities, and analysis of budget support and potential other funding mechanisms. We also want to hear from the consultants some recommendations on our operations, staffing levels, maintenance, programming, and then funding needs. So like I said, our community involvement plan will be finalized once we have a consultant on board. But at a minimum, we'll have a technical advisory committee for the plan, have a community survey. I'm sure there'll be several community workshops, and then a structured public comment period for the adoption of the final plan. Oops. The timeline for the plan, we'll spend the next month finalizing the scope of work and the request for proposals. We'll open that bidding process in September, have it open for a month. And then October, we'll review those proposals and then go through the steps to award that contract. And then in November, we'll actually begin the planning process. And we anticipate it'll be about a year-long process, coming back to you in November of next year. Any questions or comments?
Questions for Annie, Council? All right, thank you. Look forward to that.
Thanks.
And we are talking about city parks, not national parks. Thanks,
segue,
Annie.
yep.
Yeah. And up next, we have the National Park Service. My colleagues, it's great to see you in a different environment, but it's nice to see you out there. National Park Service is here to talk to us about a visitor survey that they conducted, and also to give us an update on how time entry is working within the park. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves to the council, that would be great.
I'll stay over there. Hi, I'm still the relatively new superintendent from Southeast Utah Group, which includes, of course, Canyonlands, Arches, and Hovenweep and Natural Bridges, and so we're glad to be here. And I know I will continue to offer that anytime any one of you want to hear more about timed entry or other things that are going on, we're always open to share with the community, as we live in the community as well. So I'm going to start off with the pilot timed entry and begin with an overview of some challenges and opportunities overall. Then I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Amy, who are more on the front line. So some of the challenges that we've been witnessing is processing time per vehicle has increased. So even though we're trying to, overall wait times have improved, we continue to improve and fix things overall. But public perception of line length is not positive. This is consistently our most frequent complaint and one that we continue to work on. So one common suggestion is to implement a fast pass lane. It certainly isn't possible now, I think, with our just 2-lane road overall, but I guess that it could be considered in the future, but I don't know how we would do something like that. So then our staff morale and retention, it's a pretty hard job, and they're doing the same thing every day. So we're trying to do the best we can to listen to feedback. I brought pizza, just everything else we can, but so that's a second challenge. A third is a perception of decreasing visitation, and this one's going to be pretty important. I think a lot of you have probably heard about things that are going on other places. So Arches is down 27.9% in June. Other parks are down too. Canyonland is negative 22%. Natural Bridges is 22.8%. Capitol Reef is 12.5%. Bryce Canyon is 10.5% down. Zion is 15.6% down. Grand Canyon is 6.2% down. And Yellowstone is 34% down, and that was before the floods. So again, I think we were in COVID. People were able to telework, teleschool, go all over the place, and I don't know if that's part of it, but we're watching it overall. So, and then the final challenge is infrastructure. We may need to improve the entrance road in the future to better accomplish timed entry patterns. But again, we're still in the pilot stage, and I would suspect that even next year, if we do continue, it'll be pilot. So then some opportunities or successes. So we have reduced congestion in parking lots and on trails. I think, how many of you have gone to Arches under timed entry? I know you have, and you have. So have you seen a difference? People have said wow, you don't have to fight for parking, especially in the major lots. So, and then secondly, it's definitely an improved visitor experience. We're getting a lot of comments overall on that. Anecdotal evidence, comment letters, and reviews are coming in from visitors. The redistribution of visitors throughout the day is really good. Of course, right now, a lot of people don't want to go when it's super hot. A reduction in surges at the visitor center and other facilities, so we're kind of flowing people through. That's good as well. We've reduced entrance line length and wait times. During peak hours, are the morning through the early afternoon, lines generally run 45 minutes to 1 hour long. It's still a long time to wait in line, but it's not as bad as it was before we did this timed entry. And then there's a low turnaround rate of approximately 12 to 15%. In July, many of these visitors have been accommodated with available reservations. So I think the other thing that I think is a real success is that we've activated the MIC a little bit more. So for one thing, we are now the permits for fiery furnace are at the MIC, and that people, if they need help to go get tickets, they go to the MIC. And so we're seeing kind of an increase in that. I don't know if it will last. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to say a little more.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kate Thomas, and I'm the Public Affairs Specialist for the Southeast Utah Group, and I've been very intimately involved with timed entry and the public pulse and how folks are feeling about timed entry overall. So that's what I'll talk about a little bit here, and we'll discuss what visitors actually think about the process. So we've talked about some of the difficulties that we've faced, but just as Patty relayed, we've had a lot of successes. So we've really improved visitor experience. We have really helped dampen down the congestion, the crowding in parking lots, and people are feeling much better when they're in the park. And so I want to share with you some of those reviews. And if you go into recreation.gov, which we probably don't have time to do right now, but I did have a link to it in the PowerPoint. But if you hop on recreation.gov and you just type in the Arches Timed Entry System, there's nearly 5,000 reviews, and we have 4.4 out of 5 stars. So it's really fantastic, and you can just scroll through there. If you need to pick me up throughout the day, like, is Arches doing all right? You know, you can hop on to rec.gov and take a look at it, and it's really wonderful and reassuring to see. And we've also been getting a lot of positive Facebook comments. We've been receiving a lot of letters, emails, just folks that are singing the praises of the program. Now, that being said, we have had some negative feedback on the program, right? Folks are still worried about that entrance line length, but as Patty said, as long as it feels, 45 minutes to 1 hour, it is still half of what it used to be on busy times last year. So we actually have significantly reduced the entrance line wait time, and we kind of need the community's help maybe in alleviating some of those misperceptions, because we're just getting a lot of feedback of, oh, I bought a timed entry ticket, why did I still have to wait an hour? Well, if you hadn't had a timed entry ticket, you may have been waiting 2 hours, 3 hours, and not gotten into the park. So it really has significantly improved the wait time. So we just want to be really clear with that. But we do get some complaints on that. We get some complaints about the lack of spontaneity, the extra steps, the additional fees, and of course there's a lot of dislikes for yet another government program. But by and large, it's a pretty small minority, so we're really happy to see that while we are getting some complaints, we're not getting nearly the complaints that we thought that we would. And if I move forward onto this next slide, this is great. It's probably hard for everybody to see, but there's a lot of fantastic reviews. So some of those little bubbles are from Facebook, and then the black ones that you see, those are emails that we've received. And we're getting comments like, timed entry is a great thing. We visited Arches 2 days in a row and found the entry process quick and smooth. The park was not overcrowded. There was available parking at all times. So thank you for a positive change that has made the experience better. And that's just one of many. So we have dozens and dozens of comments like this that we have been receiving. So it's really great to see. And again, if you just hop on our Facebook page or if you go on direct.gov, you can see a lot of these comments for yourself. As for the implementation in general, all of our tickets successfully launched on all of our release dates from January through July. We didn't have any reported rec.gov problems. That was a big concern. Folks were worried that maybe the website would crash, but we didn't have any of those difficulties, which was fantastic. We've also learned that mornings are more popular than afternoons. Mornings will sell out weeks ahead of time, whereas afternoons might not sell out till the day before. And most days do sell out, and most days have sold out until summer temperatures began to rise. So once we got into late June, early July, and we started seeing 90, 100-degree days, those afternoons, those tickets weren't selling out. But that's been kind of a good thing, because anybody who's come through the gate and said, I don't have a timed entry ticket, we've been able to say, well, guess what? We have availability. You can come back at 1 p.m., 2 p.m., and enter the park. So we've been able to, what we think is, meet the current demand for park access. So that's felt really good the past month. And if you look at this picture right here, this just shows you today, actually, so that's July 26, 2022. You can see that we did have a lot of tickets still left in the afternoon, which meant that for folks that didn't plan ahead, we were still able to give them the opportunity to come back in the afternoon and let them into the park with a timed entry reservation during those times. So it's been really nice. And one last thing before I pause for some questions is that we did receive on July 11th a letter from the U.S. Travel Association, and this was actually sent to the National Park Service as a whole. And this letter, while it supports timed entry systems and the need for timed entry, it does request a few things, and one of those would be more consistency among parks, and the other would be a 1 year in advance reservation period. So this organization is actually asking for further out reservations than what we've been doing, which is 3 months. And so we'd really be interested in engaging with the community on this topic in the future, just to see what Moab really wants in relation to this, because a year ahead is a long time, and it's maybe not always possible to have the exact same schedule as another national park. So we just wanted to get your feedback on this, at least at some point in the future. But before I get into the survey, since it's a little bit of a different subject, I wanted to see if there were any questions on this part so far.
Kaylin?
I'm wondering if you could expand a little on the turnarounds. I'm a little, even though they're down, I'm still surprised that they're still that high, because I imagine it's frustrating for people to go through the whole line and then 12 to 15%, if I understand correctly, get turned around.
Right.
Do you know why people are?
So I think what we've learned is that there is a small proportion of people who are what we would call, or Amy would call, a pass-through visitor, right? So folks who don't really plan ahead necessarily. They just say, hey, I'm going to drive down to Arches today and see what happens. And we think that that little segment is just going to stay pretty constant over time. You know, it did decrease, and then it's leveled off. It's not necessarily an advertising issue or an outreach issue. It appears to just be that there's a certain group of folks that do that. What is nice is that we have been able to accommodate those people lately. So we've had enough tickets in the afternoon that we've been able to just say, hey, you know what, you don't have your ticket right now, but you can come back here in a couple of hours. So that turnaround rate does not, what you're seeing up there does not include the number that actually comes back and enters the park. So those are just the people who don't initially have a ticket, but we are, at least right now, getting most of those people into the park.
And I know other parks that did similar systems saw what we're seeing, which is it just sort of stabilizes at this like 15% to 20% level, and that's what Glacier experienced last year. And even by the end of their season, they still had around 15 to 20% turnarounds. They sort of bucketed them in a few different categories. It was like people who were truly unaware, came in, somehow never got the message, right? So maybe that was about a third of the people they felt like they needed turned around. A third were people who maybe had the information but didn't have all the information, so they maybe some part of it was confusing. They didn't know that it was for that part of the day or for every day or whatever, so they kind of were, they had maybe the overall message but not the details of the system. And then the third of them were kind of like testing the gate, right? Like seeing if you're actually working. Yeah. So, I think those are kind of categories to look at the visitors, and are they truly unaware? Are they just saying they're unaware? It's hard to know, but we saw a significant drop between April and May in our turnaround rate, but since May it's been just pretty constant.
Okay.
Consistent at that level.
Just interesting that 2/3 of the visitors, it sounds like, could potentially get on their phone while they're waiting in this 45-minute line, check the availability, and turn around themselves without making it to the gate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just makes
We count turnarounds if we see them on our entrance route.
Okay.
So we're counting anyone that gets in our line and then turns around.
Okay. So I heard that, like in previous years, that there were some morale issues with staff just because of like people who might have thought their job was something else, just like doing traffic control and cleaning over unclean bathrooms and so forth. Has morale improved with?
The job is hard. The people that are in the booth overall, we're doing the best we can to. I'm starting to get somewhat creative. It would be nice if we could form a job that's half does that for half a week and then you do it half a week. So it's just one of those kind of grueling jobs overall.
Yeah.
I know.
But we,
Yeah.
so what I'd like to add is that we have done a lot of things. You know, we've really improved safety. We've increased signage. So that's why there's the great big sign that's on Highway 191. That's why there's the big sign that's right at the entrance to the park. And then we've also decreased the operational complexity too. So we started off with quite a few more staff in the beginning, and then we've kind of reduced the numbers outside because it's really hot. And I think that we were a little overly optimistic by thinking how many people we could have for how long outside in the elements. So we've decreased the amount of time that folks are out there. So they used to be out there for a couple hours. Now they're out there for about 45 minutes to an hour. And we just turn that over as quickly as we can to keep people cool, keep them hydrated, keep them safe. So we've made a lot of changes based on staff feedback, and that's really helped. So our morale, to answer that question too, the morale has improved significantly from when we first started.
Great.
Yeah.
Pizza helped too.
Jason?
I was kind of piggybacking off of Kaylin, you know, because it does seem like the line's like really long, you know, and I'm wondering if like part of the reason is those people, those pass-throughs, you know, you're in your, you know, your 30-foot motorhome, you have no opportunity to make a 72-point turn to turn around if you don't have a permit. And I imagine that these people are the ones that are kind of causing a lot of the backup and it not moving so fast and stuff. And, you know, so I was just kind of curious, you know, like the one on rec.gov, it said like at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, there was 17 things. If it's 2 o'clock and there's 17 spaces, do you tell people like, hey, well, we're going to let you ride in, or do they have to get on rec.gov and book it and stuff? And so is that causing delays, you know, in people having to get on rec.gov, make an account, you know, and do all that stuff while they're right at the gate, you know? Are those problems that you're seeing? And I'm just kind of, you know, because I hear feedback in town, you know, stuff about, you know, and driving by it all the time, and it's the long lines, and someone told me that there's painted on the road like 1.5 hours from here or something like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but.
It's not painted, but there's.
Oh, is it there? So,
Yeah.
you know.
We tend to be a little, we try to say it's more so that they,
Yeah.
you know, like it's 30 minutes, even though it maybe is only 20, because it's interesting because one line might go a lot slower than others, and we don't know why. And again, if we ultimately.
Could it be split up? Like, hey, you have a definite reservation. You're staying in this lane. You're a looky-loo. You're in this lane, you know, and stuff, so that you kind of get that fast pass action, you know, like, hey, you're trying to buck the system. You're over here. You have a definite reservation at time. You're in this one to kind of keep things going faster through. And it's not, but
I would
I
say
don't
the
know.
majority of people in the entrance line do have reservations. And so, I mean, there's just a lot of factors at play with that line length. I mean, you know, arrival patterns, you know, we also have the exceptions for like commercial uses, returning, you know, we allow people to return on the same day, so we often see longer lines in the afternoons because you come back in with that same reservation. Processing time at the booth is variable depending on who's in the booth. There's just a lot of different things that play into those line lengths. And
Yeah.
so it is a challenge.
No, it is. Yeah, and even like from that, like from the commercial use, you know, like I have a lot of experience with the CUA in there and stuff, and it's like we'll have a bus with 45 people in it, which is 45 less, or you know, maybe 20 less cars, you know, and we're still waiting an hour and a half in line too, you know, just like everyone else, you know, and we're trying to help the system. And so I think there's a lot of people who are trying to help it, they just can't get through that line, you know, and stuff. So
And we are looking at ways that we can improve that, you know.
a bypass. So,
Be a
yeah.
tunnel.
Yeah, that's what Patty was saying.
This is, we're just going through the pilot right now, and then there is some consideration maybe we do another entrance road, but, you know, there's a lot of things to it. So we had determined, it's just mainly 6-month seasonals that are, you know, managing this, the pilot, you know, especially in the booth. So we have talked before about adding October, but I'm thinking that we just see what October goes to, because it's a busy time. So I just want to know what you all think, you know, overall. I don't know that I'd have enough staff if I could do in October, but I don't know, maybe we'll learn something, I guess. So I don't even know if you two have a.
I think October would be maybe a good month as like a trial. Say, hey, we did it this whole time, you know, October, because it's still going to be busy in October, and see, you know, if people are like, oh, this was so much better when it was the timed entry, you know, or something. So, I don't know.
Yeah, ultimately, if we do do a pilot timed entry, or do it permanently, we will be looking for some funding, and so overall from the government to make that happen. And so that's why we want to know how long it should be, because that would focus on staffing, and then how, you know, how, yeah, if we're going to do it year round or, you know, part-time, all those things. So a lot of considerations. We haven't really talked yet whether next year is a second pilot, so I'd like to hear from you all. You know, would you rather have it a pilot, or it seems like one more year to pilot could help us a little bit, but I just want to know your thoughts.
I think that 2 years would be good, because I don't think, I don't think the data that's coming just from this year is really going to give you a good overview. I think things have got to equalize a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would think that 2 years, just because I think this has just been a weird year.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I
think it's been a weird 3 years.
Well, it has, but
I'm only here just 2 years, you know, moving COVID and everything. That's good.
No,
Some
I
thoughts?
agree. I think that 2 years makes sense. Like, from my perspective, more data always helps you make like slightly more informed decisions. And with any sort of program development, there's always growing pains early on. And so some of those earlier points of data aren't always the more reflective. And kind of having that gap between the 2 years allows you to potentially make some adjustments and make comparisons between the two different points in time to see if it's helping or hurting or anything like that.
So Amy is the visitor use manager, so she's kind of the one, and she also does our planning and NEPA overall, and so she has somebody who's helping collect the data, because we know that data is going to be really important.
Yeah.
And so, have you learned anything yet?
She learned nothing.
That's a big thing. Yeah. We've definitely, yeah, we're still, you know, analyzing things.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
And now, and have we spent some time at Willow Springs and those areas?
yeah, we've been looking at data on our secondary roads and have not seen a noticeable change in visitation on those roads.
And we'll see, there'll be a change, of course, when the Utah Raptor State Park is, you know, fully operational, so.
Okay.
So again, I'm always open to listen to anyone in the community, so if somebody reaches
We have
out
a
to you.
survey partner.
Okay, good.
Yeah, sorry,
That's
we'll hurry.
Any other questions on timed entry? We'll have further conversations when we have our meetings about some of the things that the Park Service would like to know, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I will just try to blaze through this really quickly, but just within the last few weeks, we received our 2021 visitor survey results. So these are really great because they help us understand visitor and trip characteristics, visitor perceptions of park management, and visitor spending profiles. So I think Amy has a copy that she was going to share with you at the end of this that you guys can take a look at and just dig down into. But it really does help us when we are planning for the future and making management decisions. So this is really just a great tool, and the study that we did last year is being repeated this year, so we'll be able to see how it changed under timed entry versus before timed entry. So we did this survey from May 28th through June 7th, 2021 at Arches, and then November 5th through November 15th also at Arches for a peak season and non-peak season period. Same thing with Canyonlands. We sampled from May 14th to May 29th, and then October 24th through November 21st, and those captured, again, summer and winter visitors. And I won't go through all of these, but it's safe to say that we actually had a lot of respondents, right? Yeah. We were impressed by how many people actually filled out the cards or did the on-site survey, mailed back the survey. So we had a really just great rate of folks completing those surveys. So we had a large data set, so it was very, very helpful. The first key takeaway was that Arches visitors, especially Arches summer visitors, were more likely than Canyonlands visitors to respond that visiting arches was their primary reason to come to the local area. So when you look at these graphs and you look closely, you'll see that for folks that visited arches, a lot of them in the summer said, yes, this is the primary reason I came to Moab. This is the number one reason that I'm here. It's to see Arches National Park. And so that was something that we were really curious about, I think, and the community was really curious about. But definitely those summer visitors like to visit Arches National Park, and it is the main reason for them to visit this local area. Now, winter visitors were really different. If you look at the second bar set from the top there underneath touring site season, you'll see hiking outside of Arches National Park. 41% of respondents in the wintertime actually said that hiking outside of Arches National Park was their primary reason for coming to the area. So summer visitors really, really want to visit Arches for Arches' sake, but winter visitors like to visit other places in the local area. So it's kind of cool to see how that changes during different seasons throughout the year. Some more additional takeaways: 61% of visitors in the winter and 51% of summer visitors agreed or strongly agreed that the trails were not too crowded, so the number of the people on the trail was acceptable to them to protect the quality of visitor experiences. But another way to look at this, though, I think, is that 49% of summer visitors agree that it is too crowded. So we do have an interesting split on who thinks it's crowded versus not crowded. So there's definitely a large demographic that maybe doesn't think things are as crowded as we feel that they are, but there's also a large segment that thinks that yes, these trails are too crowded. So that was kind of a cool statistic just to take a look at. Winter visitors were more crowding intolerant. I don't think that's too much of a surprise. So a lot of winter visitors said that they dislike crowds and were trying to get away from crowds and used crowding coping strategies like visiting early or late in the season or going on less crowded trails. 80% of Arches visitors also visited Canyonlands, and 33 to 53% of Arches visitors also visited one or more of the following: so Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, and Grand Canyon. So people who visit Arches do get around and go to a lot of the other national parks in the area. And another cool statistic or piece of information, I guess I should say, is that over half of Arches visitors spent 3 or more days in the local area. So people who are coming to Arches National Park, they maybe only spend 3 to 5 hours at Arches, but they are staying a couple to 2 to 3 days in the local community. So that's really cool to see as well. Visitors demonstrated flexibility in planning their visit to Arches with a willingness and ability to shift and go to different places across the day, week, month, or year, but they were not as flexible in their willingness to visit the park without visiting popular areas, if that makes sense. So they were definitely willing to change their itinerary, like, oh, I'll go at a different month, I'll go on a different day, I'll go at a different time, that's okay to me, but I don't want to change the destinations to which I'm going to. And that will be important when we talk about site-specific reservations in just a second. And then 74% of visitors said visiting Delicate Arch was very or extremely important to their visit to the park overall, and this was higher than any location. So I think that kind of cracks me up, that 74% of visitors said, yes, Delicate Arch is the place we want to go. So I thought that was cool. So this right here, these are management practices or mitigation strategies for crowd management, and folks were asked what they supported, and you'll see that 67% of people supported expanding the trail network in the park, 59% supported timed entry reservations, 44% supported expanding parking at primary sites, 40% for site-specific permits, which means 60% was against them, 34% for implementing temporary closures, 28% for mandatory shuttles, and 69% for voluntary shuttles. So going back to that site-specific permits statistic there, when I was reading more into the study, it was very interesting to see that some folks said, that they would be very willing to do timed entry or day use entry permits, but if there were site-specific reservations, especially if they were for the primary areas like Delicate Arch, the windows, they would not want to come to the park. And I think that number was 74% were actually against that strategy. So that, I think, was very interesting as well. So Amy, anything else I missed before we get to questions?
I think just highlighting the shuttle stat comparison, we've heard a lot about shuttles over the last 5 to 10 years when we're talking about Arches and visitor use in Arches. And I think this stat is very telling because we've only really done a full analysis for voluntary shuttles. It's hard to see how effective those would be at actually managing visitor. You've started to look more at mandatory shuttles, similar to what Zion has, but it's just interesting to see the public split there between mandatory and voluntary. People like the idea of a voluntary shuttle, not so much the idea of a mandatory shuttle.
Interesting. Questions on the visitor survey?
Oh, you have something to leave on, right? Did you bring it?
Oh, yeah. Yep, they're back here.
Okay, you want to just give them to me?
Sure.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
it. That was very informative.
Anytime. Again.
No, and I just want to say, Patty, thank you for all your help with the this is very much an economic-driven thing for Moab, you know, and for the businesses, and with the time to entry, and as well with your help with even Northwash, you know, because Northwash is a huge economic piece and tool of Moab and stuff, and even, you know, so I think that I appreciate all your work with that.
Oh,
You know, you're doing-
as much as we can.
Yeah, no, I
We
appreciate
kind
it.
of share
I
boundaries.
know, I know,
That's kind of
it's a very convoluted thing.
complicated. Yep. It's great.
Thank you, guys. Nice to see
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for everything you do. And please let your staff know that the city really appreciates all the work that the park does for our community. Okay, so we're going to deviate a little bit from our agenda. As you may or may not be aware, Pat Creek flash flooded this evening. There's a big rain event up on the mountain. And so Chuck is here to give us an update on what happened and what he needs to do.
We'll give an update at the end to see how it goes. He's going to do his transportation plan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
first,
misunderstood you.
And then so he can get out and do some inspections while
Oh,
it's still
okay.
light out. And then
All
we
right,
can-
wrong, I was completely wrong in everything I just told you. But Chuck has a lot of work to do because there was a flash flood. I saw some photos. I don't think it was it was bad, but I don't think any homes were impacted or anything.
Not that I'm aware of yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
It seems under control at the moment.
Mill Creek ran.
Yeah.
Oh,
also,
really?
Yeah.
Is it duckyable?
Yeah,
What'd you say?
Paddleboard?
Can we take duckies on it? Inspect it?
yeah, you
Yeah, you
could.
could. You might
At your
get
own risk.
Yeah, you might get snagged down there right behind my house. So what we're going to do is modify the agenda and let Chuck go first to talk about the United Transportation Master Plan so he can get out there and do the work that he needs to do to help manage this flood. So sorry for any confusion about that, you guys. Things are happening quickly. So Chuck, take it away.
Yes.
Thanks for coming in and doing it.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate that.
So the master plan hasn't really changed since you saw it about 6 weeks ago, the draft final, except that, as we talked about at the last meeting in my report, we added the Vision Zero goals and supportive documentation so that it allows us to apply for the Safe Streets for All funding. We sent you what we're proposing as the final action plan, transportation plan, and also the red lines in case you were interested to see what changes we had made since you had an opportunity. I didn't prepare a presentation, be happy to answer questions. You know, we've got those documents, we could put them up if you have them. Otherwise, by adopting the plan, it allows us to pursue funding, as well as it will guide us in our own budget in terms of what projects council may want to pursue funding, whether it's the Safe Streets for All funding or other funding, or just our own internal budget. But I think it provides a good pathway forward. We think we had a successful public involvement effort. I guess I would say thanks to all the members of the Technical Advisory Committee who helped. Their input was really helpful on this. And we met multiple times, so we took a lot of people's time to try and get that input. And so that's my presentation, or my recommendation the council adopts. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, council? Galen?
Thanks, it looks good, but I have a few questions.
Okay.
Why are 191 intersection improvements included? Because like whenever we talk about them, it seems like it's always, oh, that's UDOT's jurisdiction, we can't do anything. And then here they are in a local transportation plan.
Good question. And what it does is it allows us to go to UDOT and say, we've been through this process. By the way, they funded about 75% of the plan. And what's important to our citizenry and to our transportation network in the city and the county are these intersections at 191, and we really can't turn a blind eye to them. And that's been effective in terms of their own planning process when they did the Southeastern Utah Regional Plan about 6 months ago, if you recall.
Yes.
we came in and reported it. Intersection improvements were one of the high priorities. In fact, I think the number one was 200 North at Main Street. And they conducted a study just within the last 3 months and intersection signal analysis. And what they told me is the analysis says that it doesn't justify a signal at this time. However, they're taking it to the next step, which is a intersection condition evaluation. So there may be some things that they can do there. So the advantage for us in looking at the 191 intersections those are the places where citizens and the advisory committee and looking at accident data where our street networks intersect.
Yep, okay. So the parking structure was mentioned in a couple places, but there was no real recommendation. And I realized that we moved on from that with the hotspot funding, but it's deed restricted to parking, as I understand it.
It is.
And so it's wholly surrounded by developable lands in the middle of downtown. So the combination of those things suggests to me that a parking structure there, like enhancing its deed restricted use, would still be beneficial, and it might be worth mentioning that as at least as something for the future. Instead, it seems like it's just sort of and so like in the previous plans, the Moab parking management study, like said to continue forward with a plan to add a parking garage on the current city lot, and the recommendation in this plan is recommend that project not advance. And so I'm not sure that, like, it seems like that's closing the door a little firmly.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, it seemed like that door was pretty closed from my perception, but it's not just my perception that guided that comment. It was from the citizens who came in, and in the technical advisory committee, that was their perception too. When council said no to the parking structure, in people's minds, it's like that, even the ones who liked the parking structure, it's like, okay, that ship has sailed. We got to go, we're doing something else with the median parking, the next level hotspot. So that's why it was like, okay, there was kind of this perception of there's no benefit in chasing a parking structure again, when there's all these other projects that would help the transportation network.
For sure, unless there's funding that's specific to that. We do projects based on, it seems like my perception is that we do projects based on the available funding. And that can, so like we have our independent prioritization of what we, especially you, think are the priorities for the transportation system. But then if funding comes along that is specific to a particular project, then that may be pursued. And so if
I'm open to putting that back in there. If that's what you guys want to do, but that's why it was phrased that way, as there was just this perception that it was over. And that's why we didn't do a bypass too, is because the resolutions from the council and the commission saying don't do the bypass. That's why we stayed away from that during this plan.
Yep.
So if there's language that you want to, I think we put the agenda to either adopt it or revise it. If there's something that council wants to revise, we could. I'm just hopeful we can get something tonight so we can get the grant application going.
Yeah, I meant to contact you before this meeting to discuss these and other questions, so I'm just cherry picking a few high level ones, but I'm ready to adopt it regardless.
Oh, okay, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Okay, one more. Why does 100 North have a higher classification than Spanish Valley Drive? 100 North is a minor arterial, which, as I understand it, would make it eligible for federal funding, whereas Spanish Valley Drive is only a major collector.
Well, I think that's the difference between the city and the county.
Okay.
So back in the day, which was in the 70s, I believe, the Federal Highway Administration came up with this system to identify those roads, collectors, and arterials. And those are the roads that are eligible for certain federal funds. So each local community worked with UDOT to identify the roads that they thought were collectors and arterials. And you can go in and modify those. So from our perspective in the city being smaller and the traffic counts, I think that's why they originally made 100 North that minor collector. What they were thinking at the county, I don't know, because it seems like that's always been and I don't mean that facetiously, but I mean, right now that's such a corridor for them that I agree with you. I would think it might be an arterial of some sort as opposed to a collector. But looking county-wide, maybe they had the road to Cisco as one of their arterials, because they don't just do southern Grand County, it would be all of Grand County. So I think our smaller geographic area would make 100 North an arterial for us. That might be why Spanish Valley would be there, but I don't know what they were thinking when they did that, except that it's the larger geographic area.
Okay. And so you just went with the previous plans and designations rather than reevaluating them in the context?
There are ways to do that. Periodically, the feds will ask us as local communities to come back and allow us to revise those. Right now, I think they're pretty close. Could they be tweaked? Yeah, I mean, based on traffic volumes and traffic patterns, I think they're pretty close to being accurate. There might be some room for revision in the city. If that opportunity comes up, we can talk about that.
Okay.
But that's why the difference between larger geographic area versus smaller geographic area and concentration of vehicles.
Yep. All right, thanks.
You bet.
Other questions
I
for Chuck?
just have a comment. I don't really have a question, Chuck. I just feel like I've sort of been a voyeur to all of those meetings, and because they were playing in my office. I was never invited. But I want to thank you and the committee for all the work you did. There were a lot of meetings, and there was a lot of good work done and good collaboration. And I have not read this in detail, but I've read every iteration that's come out. And so I feel like there's not a lot that I can add to it. I think it's a good piece of work.
Thank you. And if I may real quick, you brought up something. This was a joint city-county plan. I mean, I think that in itself is pretty exciting, right? I mean, we're so close. And I think the working with county staff, I don't know what the commission will do. Their council is up first for potential adoption tonight. And then it's going to go to the county commission late in August, I believe. But I think that the concept of this was a good one, and I think it played out well.
Yeah, it did.
Anybody else? Questions, comments for Chuck? I'm going to ask if somebody would be willing to make a motion to approve the Moab Unified Transportation Master Plan and perhaps modify the one language about the parking structure to include? No?
No.
Okay. I'll ask for motion to approve the plan.
I will move to approve the Grand County and City of Moab Unified Transportation Master Plan.
Okay. Motion made by Tani. Do I have a second?
Second?
Seconded by Kalen. Any discussion, Tani?
No.
Kalen?
Nope.
Anybody else? All right, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of approving the Moab Unified Transportation Master Plan?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes 4-0. Thanks,
Thank-
Chuck. Good
thank
luck
you.
out there. Let
Thank
us
you
know
very much.
tomorrow what's going on.
Stay safe.
I'll keep Carly in the loop.
That sounds great.
Happy kayaking.
Yeah.
He really wants to
Don't
get out there
fall
on
in.
his boat.
Yeah, right. Don't fall in. All right, see you tomorrow. All right, moving back up, and I probably should have asked for a motion to modify the agenda, but I didn't, and so here we are. We're going to move back up to number 5, consent agenda. We have 2 items. Approval of the bills against the City of Moab in the amount of $515,349.51, and then approval of our minutes from July 12, 2022. A motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Moved by Kalen, second.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Jason. Discussion, Kalen?
Nope.
Jason?
No.
Anybody else?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. Next, old business, approval of the minutes from June 28th. If you recall, at our last meeting, we pulled those off of the consent agenda. Ronnie had some corrections she'd like to make, so in your packet, we have 2 sets of minutes. One were the original set. The second one was the corrections or additions, changes that Ronnie made. So you have an option. You can approve the original minutes, or you can approve the minutes with Ronnie's changes. So I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes from June 28th, either the originals or the ones with the changes.
I'll move to approve the minutes from June 28th with Ronnie's changes incorporated.
Okay. Motion by Luke. Second by Galen. All right. All right, we have a motion to approve the June 28th minutes with the changes requested by Ronnie. Motion made by Luke, seconded by Kalen. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. Okay, moving on to the big conversation of the evening. As you know, we've been talking about this for a long time. I've talked to all of you about this in our meetings that we've had over the last week. And we also talked about the fact that, and we've got Nathan on the call, so he'll be here to answer any questions legally. And then after this discussion, we'll go into an executive session to talk a little bit more about it. But just for the public's information, the county did pass a pending ordinance regarding something similar to this. They passed this at their meeting last Tuesday. We talked to them. We were hoping that they would hold off on that, but they decided to move forward because we wanted to get what we are working on through first, and hopefully they could use what we came up with. But they decided to move forward with their pending ordinance. And so tonight, we're going to have a presentation by Corey. And in your packet, there was 3 ordinances. One was the original one that we've seen for a while. The second one was the changes that have been recommended over time based on our conversation with the Private Property Coalition, the Home Builders, and the Utah Realtors Association. And then the third ordinance is some new ideas that came up that we'll be talking about, correct?
Right. Well, the third option, as we're discussing, wasn't included in the packet as we were still working on the development, but that is the structure we'll be reviewing tonight.
All right. So, Corey, I'm just going to turn it right over to you. We're going to probably talk mostly about the changes and potential reframing, correct?
Perfect. Thank you, yes. Checking with Lisa, do we have Nate Mitchell?
We can bring him out.
Okay,
for this.
I think that'd be beneficial.
We definitely want him for the closed session.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Nathan, for being available. We're just going to enter into presentation right now. Hopefully our barcode sharing system works as well. Very good. Nathan or Nate, are you able to see this presentation? Well, hopefully so. At least if they can hear us, then they'll follow along.
They'll text Carly.
Yeah, just well enough. This presentation is really going to bring us back through some summary items. It has been a while since we've been before the public and the council in this format, but of course have been continually having this conversation. So going to take this opportunity from a staff perspective to reorient where we're at within this ordinance and the general structure. So getting back to our ordinance 2022-05, and really what we're circling in around is the active employment household ordinance is the title set. So in summary, what an active employment household and active employment units are. As we're communicating, I think, with people in the community, it's been beneficial to clarify again what the base roots of these are. So we won't go over it in depth, but wanted to have it displayed in the presentation. This is an excerpt from the proposed ordinance profiling what the qualifications for a person under the active employment household that would be qualified to occupy active employment unit. That qualification set has been continually tweaked, and as we've expanded the ordinance, broadened to a pretty significant scope to the effect of really, in a quick summary, anybody that is within the local community, a local resident, and actively engaged in the community through a workforce to some degree. And we have a broad degree that includes, as well as any retired persons that would have previously fallen under those same qualifications. And then in addition to that, any persons that might qualify under the Fair Housing Acts and American with Disabilities Acts, as well as other federal and state programs. So it's really such a quite broad net to capture anybody that we might consider an essential part of our community, and specifically our workforce. Really, the folks or the units, really, because it's not individuals at this point, the units that would be excluded from this are purely vacation-oriented or second home without a rental capacity driven units. So again, not even really an individual at that point or even a household. They're kind of interchangeable units to some degree. So that's the only thing that would not qualify under these provisions as they're laid out now. Getting into where and when this ordinance would be applied, what we're looking right now is just application in the R3 and R4 zones. You can see on this map, I'm sure for folks at home, hopefully it's bigger, that orange area being the R3, with a majority of that space being really within the main center of our original town site of Moab, really the heart of old Moab, with some additional areas in the community over on 500 West. And similarly with the R4 zone, some select properties just off of the center main street of Moab into First and Second, and then off to the cross streets onto the west side of Moab. And then a major portion of property, which we've had to acknowledge, and we've done within the data, definitely skewed some of our numbers a little bit, identifying this R4 parcel to the south end of the property, which is the Sitla USU campus, which is a massive amount of property that is really not going to be developed like we might see downtown. So we've compensated for that already. And within these zones, we are only looking at the multi-household use parameter, or excuse me, permitted use, and then of that, amending the use parameter set. How we're processing and enforcing this proposed ordinance is really in line with everything that we're currently doing, because again, all we're doing is amending the use parameters of our existing permitted use and complying with all of the provisions that we've set forward in our municipal code so far. So the different application sets as a development might come in is, of course, scalable. Everything from a project that might not even need a site plan application, is just the building permit stage, or it goes beyond a site plan application into a townhome or condominium process, which is really a ownership overlay onto what would be a site plan application. And of course, all of those going down and boiling down to the enforcement mechanism and processing, which is that review, approval, and procedure process that we have, as well as what would be the flagging mechanism to maintain the properties as the base route of a deed restriction. And again, only in just these two zones here with that one particular use. And then where we're at now with the amendment options being proposed, and this is where hopefully this will help clarify the discussions we're looking at it now, is option one, which is the tabled ordinance, can be summarized as the 42.5% ordinance. Those are kind of the big flag markers I think we can all remember pretty well, being officially tabled on that March 31st meeting. Since then, we've been amending and coming before council and negotiating and I think working towards a really great solution. What is now being proposed as option two, and this is, as the mayor had suggested, what is before you in your packet. So it does have some of those development incentives and extra provisions provided through some of the discussions that we've had. And then option three, which is going to be some new material to you tonight, but would be the new staff recommended amendments to what was in the packet. And there's really only two amendments. They are significant, but fairly clear. So we'll go over those, of course. As we're looking at the framework, this is what we're doing. We are amending these sections, and this is what the ordinance is built on. So as we look into the sections, both in definitions, the individual zones, and then creating its own chapter. Within option 2, really just to quickly profile the summary of changes that we are now seeing that have come into place for option 2 versus what was a original tabled option, is a decreased percentage of designated active employment units, an increased building height, a decreased parking requirement, added a recurring sunset review of the ordinance, reduced the congruity clause to tighten that up really only into a function of numbers rather than any type of quality inspection or any quality type clause. Add a deed restriction parachute, which is a phrase we've been utilizing in a sense that if the market conditions truly are not compliant to facilitate this type of a program, you can be processed and have that restriction removed. So essentially, it's if it is not working, you can pull that parachute and the restriction will be removed from that particular unit. And then this is a fairly newer item compared to some of our discussions, which is the planning and building permit fee waiver and or postponed fee, which is why Barry Ellison, our building official, is joining me tonight. We'll discuss that here in just a moment. Again, getting into the details of option 2, and I won't go through this exactly, but to have it on presented before you, these are the sections with the language of each of those changes in each of the sections. So again, just elaborating on the summary a bit. At this point, I'm kind of going to transition the presentation into what have been previous questions. We can, of course, come back for questions and discussions, which is the whole purpose, but we've had questions about, well, how does this translate? How does part of this ordinance in this particular section anyway translate to the number of units that are going to be required? So this is really just a scalable model. And again, anybody could have done this with any number, but just to have it profiled of, well, what does this mean? If I have a development of 12 units that I want to put into place, how many am I going to be required to designate? And so we can see that direct translation and then utilize that math and rounding capacity that we have in the ordinance there. Fairly straightforward. And what we've been striving to do is create a third. That's what it is. 33%, 0.33333 is the idea, but of course we had to change that because that's not an effective way to draft the ordinance. So that's why the provisions are drafted the way they are. This is meant to be a representation of the different market scenarios in which the ordinance might be reacting. So we don't need to play into this too much, but just as a visual, what we're seeing in this first column, so to the left of that first orange bar, is really what we're seeing now. We have a demand for workforce and an insufficient workforce housing stock. So the blue line is meant to represent that housing demand, what we need, and the red line being what we have. The pink line is what we're seeing is what we might think of as that 33%. Because again, with our workforce housing study that we did through BAE Urban Economics, we've understood that the exact number utilizing these zones in particular build out is 42.5. Through our elaboration and functions of that, we've been able to work our way to what is now a 33% requirement, which gives us a 10% buffer, which is then creating a deficit population to ensure that given market fluctuations, which will occur, we will always be providing a population of need to fill these units. So, which is what we're seeing in this second section here, is where the housing demand is at a certain plateau potentially, and the housing stock, because of development, increases. At this point, the idea, because of our studies, we understand that as development occurs, the need for workforce housing will percentage equally increase as well. That's a constant that we can picture anyway. So that 33% is going to give us a 10% buffer to ensure these developers are going to have somebody moving right in. These units are not going to be sitting on the market unoccupied because they're exact at threshold and things are going to move up and down. What we're seeing to the right of this is where a potential rush of development occurs and our commercial development hasn't caught up yet. So the housing stock will surpass where that housing demand is. This is representing what might trigger that parachute mechanism, Whereas if there is ever an excess of housing stock and the demand for whatever reason is lower, that developer is able to pull that parachute, relinquish that deed, and then open that as a free market unit at that point. So again, just for me, I'm very visual. That was hopefully just trying to help in some correlative way. This was included in your packet. This is just taken from the current 2020 HUD Grand County average median income number. So we kind of the official document showing that 70,600 as the average median income for Grand County. Now, how this translates into our workforce housing ordinance, utilizing this report that was generated for the county and their HCHO presentations using the HUD report, again, showing all updated numbers. You'll see this little green area, and I'm sure, council, you're unable to see that, but it was included in the packet. This is showing what a unit would have to be rented at, or what I should say more clearly is if a homeowner or somebody owning a particular property and is trying to rent a property, if they are unable to rent a property at this rate or lower, at this rate or lower for that extended period of time that was prescribed in the parachute, that is the condition in which the deed restriction would be relinquished. So giving a practical number of, well, if I have a 3-bedroom unit, what do I have to rent it at, or at least advertise it for? And if nobody's able to or willing to rent that, that's when that deed restriction parachute would kick in. And this is where we're getting into what would be the building permit fee waiver or postponement discussion. There's a lot of action occurring on this one slide, but I wanted to use this as a whiteboard for Barry and our council to really work through any of these questions. There is a little bit more of a presentation, so what my hope was is to show you what we have going on here and then can return to that when we're ready.
Corey, do you mind if we do like the particulars of the proposal enclosed, but we can certainly tee up the conversation and like how we are doing this now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Essentially what we're looking at is the options for incorporating. What we saw in the proposed ordinance was option 1 and option 2, either an option to waive or an option to postpone. What we used is a sample set of data and acquired fees from those particular sets of unit types and sizes to give us what is an accurate representation, or at least a constant which we could say, well, if I were to do a development, here's the multiples I might use to get a number. Because it would be impossible to create a matrix to show you every possible algorithm. But anyway, that's what we're seeing on this lower half is actual numbers and how they might apply, so we can have a practical sense of what we might be doing with either a waiver or postponing and what that might entail. So we'll leave it there if that makes sense. Okay. Shifting over to option 3 now, getting to the closure of the presentation. Option 3 would be those amendments that we've previously discussed and are seeing currently in the packet, in addition to what would be the deed restriction foreclosure clause. This is a clause that would, through our discussions with lenders, allow us to really be on the same playing field as any other development. We already were to some degree, I think, in the clear with the current ordinance proposed, but this would be beyond a doubt bringing us into a category which is a constant within Utah, certainly, and then within other western states. And then in addition to that would be a sunset clause of 30 years. Again, that's a standard utilized that we would be incorporating to our deed restrictions. So it's, to some degree, a technical component of that subsection, which is the deed restrictions area, it's particularly the relinquishment section of when these deed restrictions might be terminated. We'll leave it at that, I think, for now. We can certainly discuss further later. I have included what would be a recommended motion to include this option 3 if that's the direction the council would like to go at any particular point, but that'll be, I think, the conclusion of the presentation. I did move, that's a ton of material a ton of history. So if any point you need me to bring back a slide, I'd be happy to do so.
Great. Thank you, Corey. All right, you guys. Ask questions. There you go.
So this is just a process question. I'm unclear as to what the flow of this meeting is.
Okay.
When are we going to have a closed session?
Well, we have two options. We could have a closed section now. Ask questions, get your questions answered. We could go into closed session. I think the preference is let's get through the updates and then go into a closed session. But we can do whatever you guys' preference is. I think from a logistical standpoint, it's best if we wait till after, but we don't have to.
Okay. And so if we want to take action tonight and have the closed session at the end of the meeting, should we have a formal motion to table until after the closed session?
Yes, if you do want to take,
If we want to leave the option open of voting tonight.
Yeah. Nathan, we'll ask our attorney.
Yeah. Oh.
Can't hear him.
One sec, Nathan, we can't hear you. You're unmuted, but it might be on our end.
Nate Mitchell, we can't hear you either.
It's definitely us.
This happened earlier today.
Open up the agenda items again, too. You don't have to. You can move on from it and then bring it up again. Yep.
I can ask a content question.
Sure. Yeah.
While this is,
Sure.
so this is about the building and site permitting fees. So it occurs to me that this is somewhat precedent setting. There are also developments in the city that are deed restricted based on income. They are like true affordable housing developments. Do they get a fee deferment or waiver at this time?
Within the city provisions, we do not have any structure to give
Right.
waivers. Within the pad specifically is what I'm referencing.
Right, but even there are affordable housing developers that have operated in the city and have developed affordable housing outside the very lenient provisions of the pad.
Correct.
And so they haven't gotten a fee waiver. They have paid.
Correct, not that I'm aware of.
Yep.
Is that correct?
It's not my memory.
So, I mean, it seems like, to me, if we were offering a fee waiver for a for-profit development that would had AEH units, but they weren't even like within the parameters of affordable housing, then I would think, I would feel some obligation to affordable housing developers to perhaps offer the same. So I'm wondering what the budget impact might be. I mean, as long as it's a relatively small amount, but at a certain point it starts to impact the budget of the office, and maybe there's ways we could deal with that. But I don't know. That wasn't a very well-formulated question, but I'm just trying to think through the implications. Sorry.
That's, I think, if we're unable to answer the question, it's certainly right on with the topic that we'd like to discuss, because that's of the nature of our discussion.
Here's the question. Why a fee waiver instead of a deferral?
Sorry, we were trying to text Nathan about this. What was the question?
Why a waiver instead of a deferral?
Instead of a deferral. And we were going to get into closed about that, about why we're recommending, or Barry and Corey are. It seems to be about the logistics of how we impose the fee. So we can talk about that. We
Okay.
explored the option of a deferral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions while we're waiting to find out where our audio is?
Yeah, I'm still trying to sort that out, but
Nathan?
I know what the problem is, but I don't know how to fix it.
Oh.
Oh. Questions? Luke?
Yeah, in I believe it's the fifth whereas clause, we have it stating that whereas the Moab City Planning Department has received applications or inquiries for numerous multi-household projects on parcels that currently contain workforce housing that will be removed and replaced by second homes, short-term rentals, or other units that are not suitable for the Moab area and workforce. Should we have that short-term rentals in there? Because as far as I understand, short-term rentals aren't allowed in there. And if these are like our factual basis for proposing this, like, should we remove that since it's not a permitted use?
That would be a good question to, I think, Nathan Mitchell. The draft as it is now, I think that was one of those amendments that was made, I think, as a part of the overall narrative that we've worked with Snow Christensen.
Okay.
So I think we identify that, of course, but I think there was a purpose for including that language, which I don't believe was on the original version.
Okay. And then the only other thing was, it was correct in the presentation, but on page 4, section 17.70.020.8.a I, and instead it says reoccurring interval of 2 years instead of recurring.
Oh, thank you.
Just because recurring means that it's going to be happening over and over again, and not just that it's happening again.
We can make that, when we move to, I think that could be a Scrivener's amendment that we can make, certainly. Thank you.
Anybody else? Kaylin?
So I'm curious how the examination of the R4 near the university influenced the calculations, because it seems like my understanding is that Sitla's pattern and possibly and specifically on this parcel has been to prefer lodging, short-term rental type developments, eligible developments. And so even though it's zoned R4, it may not, there may be the threat of it being developed otherwise.
Correct.
So I'm just curious how, under which use scenario did you analyze for that parcel?
And the short answer is in the static, what it is zoned. We were able to remove non-applicable areas, hillsides, cliffs faces, but anything that could potentially develop, we had a static redevelopment, because again, the data was designed around build out, so not specifically on the type of use on which it was, just that it had a capacity of density. So it would be somewhat irrelevant who, within the study, who was occupying those homes, just that there were homes, because the implication that would have on the need for workforce generated from that density. That was, I think, and again, Nate Mitchell could probably expound on that a bit more, but yeah, a clarification in the study itself and what we were analyzing, and then what it was that we were using that tool for, which were slightly different. So we could use the data to accomplish what I think your question is getting to, which is, well, if we're not using it that way, why is it being counted that way? But the data study was a little bit more standard or simple to create a real threshold landscape. So we took out what would not apply, but left in what did apply.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? What we're going to do, because we're having a little audio problem, is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to ask to table the action on this depending on the outcome of the closed session. And I'm going to ask us to go into closed session right now. We'll come back out and do our reports later. And that way it'll give us some time to get our attorneys online and get some of those questions that we need to ask in closed session answered. So First, I'm going to ask for a motion to table the decision depending the outcome of the discussion in closed session. Does that make sense?
Not entirely, because if we're still in the same agenda topic, is it necessary, even if we go into the closed session will be happening in the context of the same agenda topic?
You don't have to do a vote necessarily to go into the topic. But if we were to move on from it, we might want to have tabled it. Is that what you're thinking, Kaylin?
Right,
Go into
I'd
close,
like-
then come back out. And
Right.
take it, yeah, and take an action or not. Nathan, just nod if that sounds okay. We can go into executive without making any motion. It's good he can hear us, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
did he
So we
nod?
don't need to table, right?
not yet, no.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to ask for a motion to go into closed session.
I move to go into executive closed session to have a strategy discussion to discuss reasonably imminent and/or pending litigation.
Motion by Kaylin, second.
I will second.
Second by Tawny. Discussion, Kaylin? Connie?
No.
Anybody else? All in favor of going into closed session? Say aye.
Aye.
4-0.